witch is ready to eliminate the ghost who is killing their family members one by one mysteriously. The film begins with a beautiful and serene landscape. Venus is shown walking with her bag when Jazz, her elder sister, drives by and notices her. Jazz stops her car and approaches Venus. It's revealed that Venus is running away from her parents. Jazz expresses concern for Venus as she loves her sister, warning her that the place can be dangerous. However, Venus is skeptical about the dangers. Jazz offers to share some true and frightening stories about the place with Venus, and then Venus can decide what to do next. The question remains, will Venus change her decision to leave her parents after hearing Jazz's stories, or will she stick to her original plan? Then, Jazz takes Venus to a house to tell her a chilling story about a witch. When they arrive, Jazz digs up a mirror buried in the ground and tells Venus that she found it a few weeks ago when she visited with Alex. According to Jazz, the mirror belonged to the witch, who used it for protection. Jazz hands Venus her water bottle to calm her nerves and offers her a drink. Then, standing in front of the house with Venus, Jazz begins to tell the terrifying tale. The story, titled Witchcraft Becomes Her, revolves around a young boy, Julian, who runs away from home after being constantly belittled by his father for being a boy. As soon as he becomes an adult, he escapes to a witch's lair. The witch, Anna, hands him a magical book that can fulfill his deepest desires. Before casting the spell, the witch advises the boy that the perfect timing for casting a spell is during the full moon, precisely at midnight. She also warns him of a crucial condition: he must not open his eyes during the ritual. The dark night had engulfed everything. Julian, dressed in a dark forest green gown, walked into the garden carrying a spellbook. He entered a circle surrounded by candles, lay down straight within a circular boundary, and closed his eyes. The spellbook was open beneath his outstretched hand. The wind whispered through the trees, and the candles flickered, casting an eerie glow. A terrifying figure approached from the distance. The figure stood beside Julian, opened its palm, and held it above Julian's face. It seemed as though the monster was casting a spell on the boy. After the ritual, Julian transformed into a stunningly beautiful girl. Her beauty was mesmerizing. Even the devil couldn't deny it. The devil sat beside her and whispered, "You're beautiful." The girl, Julian, despite the witch's warning not to open her eyes until dawn, accidentally opened them and saw a terrifying creature leaning over her. The creature was gray, gaunt, and had an eerie presence. Its eyes gleamed with malevolence, and it smiled, revealing sharp red teeth. The girl, Julian, shut her eyes, frozen in fear. As dawn broke, the birds chirping filled the air, creating a serene atmosphere. Then Julian sat up, touching her beautiful, dark brown hair. She stood, entered the house, and gazed at her reflection in the mirror. Overjoyed by her newfound incredible beauty, she was very happy, as her greatest wish had finally come true. The girl, Julian, calls Anna, telling her that her wish has been fulfilled. Then Anna visits the girl's house and is stunned by her attractive beauty. They sit down and the girl expresses her joy, feeling like she's finally in the right skin. However, the girl reveals that during the spell, her eyes accidentally opened and she saw the devil. The witch becomes upset, worried that the girl has seen the devil. The witch, Anna, becomes anxious. The next morning, Julian checks her mailbox and meets a man named Jacob. They introduce themselves. As Jacob catches the letter, he interacts and touches Julian's hand, and she feels an eerie sensation. Julian tries to get rid of Jacob, but he keeps appearing. He brings her favorite flowers, which surprises her. Jacob tries to talk to Julian, but she's afraid and tries to shut the door. Jacob becomes aggressive, and Julian locks the door. Julian calls the witch, telling her about Jacob. The witch visits Julian's house, teasing her about attracting men after becoming a girl. The witch reveals that Jacob is actually the devil, who was working with her but is now out of control. The witch decides to banish him. As they prepare to perform the banishing spell, Jacob appears at the door. The witch uses a remedy to repel him. Afterward, the witch and Julian prepare to cut their hair at the same spot in the garden where Julian transformed. They sit down in a magical circle, and the witch holds Julian's hand, thanking her. They begin to cast the spell. The devil, enraged, approaches the magical circle and tries to grab Julian's hair, attempting to disrupt the spell. However, the devil's hands start bleeding and the spell continues uninterrupted. The devil retreats, stretches his arms towards the sky, and lets out a terrifying scream before being banished. The witch congratulates Julian on the spell's success and moves on to the next step. Julian feels happy and relieved after hearing the story. Jazz takes Venus to a cemetery and shows her the tombstone of their great-grandmother, Mabel Bishop. The family had built the tombstone in her memory since her body was never found. Jazz tells Venus that Mabel was a respected married woman, but she had a secret. She was more interested in women than men. When Mabel's secret was exposed, the town's chief killed her. After her death, Mabel's spirit remained lonely, wandering aimlessly. Then, someone special came and alleviated her loneliness. The story, the day Mabel came out of the grave, begins with Jade lying on a bed, looking upset, while Iris seems fresh but ignores her. Jade goes for a walk and discovers Mabel Bishop's grave, triggering flashbacks about Mabel's life. Jade returns home, but Iris is still upset and leaves to buy groceries. Jade becomes frustrated and walks into the jungle, thinking about Mabel's past. She lays down on Mabel's grave. Suddenly, Mabel's spirit emerges from the lake and approaches Jade. Iris returns home and is shocked to see Jade, who then takes Iris to the jungle and shows her a hideout she dug for Iris because Iris loves solitude. However, Iris is skeptical and frightened as Mabel's ghost appears from the lake. Mabel's ghost emerges from the hideout, grabs Iris from behind, and takes her into the den. But Iris is alive and gets out of the den the next morning. While Jazz is telling this story to Venus in the cemetery, they witness a mysterious man wearing a hat in the distance. Jazz gives Venus a protective amulet for safety and tries to leave in their car, but the battery is dead. Jazz blames the ghostly presence for the car trouble. With no phone signal available, Jazz and Venus decide to walk away from the area. They call Alex in front of a house that attracts Venus a lot. Jazz wanted to tell Venus the story of that house, which belonged to painter May Fellner. The story, Paint and Black Lace, began with Brian working on his laptop at 12 o'clock when he heard the doorbell ring. A strange figure wearing black attire from head to toe brutally slit Brian's throat with a knife. Brian's body fell to the floor and blood spilled everywhere. The stranger then used a paintbrush to sprinkle lime-colored paint on Brian's blood. Afterward, Owen and Shane prepared a fake painting exhibition under May Fellner's name. At the exhibition, everyone admired May Fellner's art until Christina arrived and examined the painting as an odd color palette. Shane realized that Christina was May Fellner's close friend. Amidst the crowd, Owen saw May Fellner's ghost, which frightened him, and he rushed to Shane's side. Shane was on a call and learned that someone had murdered their realtor, Brian. They attended Brian's funeral and advised the receptionist, Evan, to take special care of May Fellner's painting. Later, the strange figure in black attire appeared again, entered the office, and went inside. While Yvonne took the vows towards the figure, it killed Evan with a polythene bag. The figure then dragged Evan's body, stabbed him with a knife, and used a paintbrush to sprinkle orange and yellow dots on Evan's body. Meanwhile, Christina lay unconscious on the ground until May Fellner kissed her and woke her up. Owen and Shane returned to find Evan's dead body. Owen went to his room, lay on the bed, while someone's reflection is shown in the mirror. Christina called Owen and asked him to meet her at Fellner Memorial Park to discuss May Fellner. Christina told Owen that she had blacked out and May Fellner's ghost had taken control of her, causing her to murder Brian and Evan. Christina blamed May Fellner's ghost for the murders, saying that May Fellner was angry with her. Christina decided to leave town to escape the situation. As Christina told Owen about May Fellner's ghost, she got mad after the exhibition, while Owen saw May Fellner standing far behind Christina. Owen returned home, where Shane congratulated him on the success of the painting exhibition. Shane hugged Owen, but May Fellner's ghost touched Owen from behind. Then Owen poured drinks into 2 glasses, one for Shane and one for himself. As Shane began to drink, Owen smashed the glass on the table and used the broken glass to slit Shane's throat brutally. Shane died, and Owen used a paintbrush to sprinkle blue dots on Shane's blood. Jazz finished telling the story to Venus, saying that in their family, those who were different never found peace, neither in life nor in death. While they are talking, Alex reaches there and gets their car fixed. Then Jazz takes Venus and leaves for another place. Jazz takes Venus to Cashel House to tell her another story. The title of this story is The Old Dark Cashel House. The story begins with journalist Madeline Ishii visiting Cashel House, where she's welcomed by the housekeeper, Mrs. Boxall. As per the house rules, Mrs. Boxall confiscates Ishii's phone and locks it in a wooden box. Ishii is then given a tour of the house, including doors that lead outside. Then Ishii meets the owner, Mrs. Cashel, who's tending to her garden. After introductions, Mrs. Cashel takes Ishii inside and shares some secrets, but warns her not to write about them. Mrs. Cashel reveals that the house is haunted for those who disobey the rules set by their ancestor, William Gwen Cashel, who mysteriously disappeared along with Miss Mabel Bishop. As Mrs. Cashel shares this, Ishii feels an unseen hand on her shoulder, causing her to scream. That night, Ishii writes in her journal, but suddenly remembers her phone and retrieves it from the wooden safe. However, the doors leading outside are now locked. Ishii uses her phone's torch to search for a way out, but instead encounters Mr. Cashel's ghost. Panicked, she drops her phone, and the ghost disappears. Ishii screams, and Mrs. Boxall comes to her aid, offering to stay with her in her room for the night. Miss Ishii was even warned by Mrs. Cashel in New York, so how could she be so foolish? I wouldn't dare spend a night in such a haunted house, nor would I ever disobey. The next morning, Ishii rushes to retrieve her phone and finds it in the storage room. As she picks it up, she notices Mr. Cashel's ghost standing right behind her, his face pale with anger. Ishii screams, and Mrs. Cashel rushes to her side. Ishii quickly picks her bags and flees the house. Mrs. Cashel warns her that Mr. Cashel won't let her leave because she broke the rules and saw him. But Ishii leaves the creepy house, unaware that Mr. Cashel's ghost follows her and sits next to her in the car. Venus realizes that Mr. Cashel is the same man they saw in the cemetery, and the one who killed their great-grandmother, Mabel Bishop. After that, Jazz gets out of the car and retrieves some items from the trunk, including Witch Anna's spellbook. Jazz wants to banish Mr. Cashel with Venus's help, so they prepare to cast a spell in the garden in front of Mr. Cashel's house. However, they need something belonging to Mr. Cashel to make the spell work. To achieve this, Jazz sneaks into Mr. Cashel's house while Venus waits outside. Venus notices a door that opens by itself. Jazz meets her there, and they enter the house together. Jazz searches the storage room while Venus stands still, suddenly facing Mr. Cashel's ghost. She screams, but the door locks behind her. Jazz rushes to her aid. Venus regains consciousness in a dark room, surrounded by Mr. Cashel's ghost. She tries to hide, but the terrifying ghost attacks her, covering her mouth and trying to suffocate her. Suddenly, Venus finds herself standing outside the house, where she meets Mabel, who hands her Mr. Cashel's hat. Meanwhile, Jazz searches for Venus and sees May Fellner on the stairs. Jazz follows her and finds Venus crying and sitting on the floor in a room. Venus hands over the hat to Jazz. After that, Jazz and Venus place the hat for the spell and start chanting together. Mabel and May Fellner stand before them. During the spell, Mr. Cashel's terrifying ghost appears, trying to separate Jazz and Venus's hands, causing blood streaks to appear on their faces. However, they continue the spell. Mabel and May Fellner intervene, pulling Mr. Cashel's ghost back. The ghost continues to attack Jazz and Venus, covering Jazz in blood. Despite this, they persevere, refusing to back down. Mabel and May Fellner drag Mr. Cashel's ghost backward as he desperately tries to escape. The spell sets the hat on fire, and the flames engulf not only the hat, but also Mr. Cashel and his evil intentions, reducing them to ashes. Covered in blood, Jazz and Venus successfully banish Mr. Cashel's evil spirit with the spell. Venus wipes the blood from her mouth, while Jazz is overjoyed. They then bury the hat's ashes in a bottle, laying it to rest in the ground. If you like this movie, then don't forget to subscribe the channel.